So are you all sitting comfortably? We're in a sort of cyberspace here, aren't we? Floating in the Z landscape with Intel. I always get caught out because in the UK we say Z, in the US it's Z. And I often end up having to produce content with both sounds and give the audio engineers a list of sounds of me going Z, 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 Z. Excellent. So we've got a few people coming in. Welcome, everybody. We're going to kick off in, I reckon, about 1 minute, and we'll begin our panel. Okay. Amazing power of modern technology for us to collaborate remotely. A while back it was people being able to share files conveniently, and now we can just have a conversation remotely if we feel like it and chat with one another. It really is science fiction. Okay, well, welcome everybody. I will kick off now. Let me start with my little intro. So, hi everyone, and welcome to the first Power Your Breakthrough live Q&A. If anyone is new to the project, Power Your Breakthrough is a campaign run by Movidiam, Z by HP, and Intel UK to help young people break into the creative industry, with free classes run by professionals on directing, motion graphics, animation, photography, filmmaking, and animation. And of course, a competition covering all of those categories with £100,000 in Z by HP and partner prizes up for grabs. It's amazing. This is the first of 2 Q&As we're running as part of Power Your Breakthrough. And the focus today is on post-production. So I'd like to welcome here our creative pros who have been sharing their expertise in the Power Your Breakthrough classes, and today are going to be answering some of your questions. We have motion graphic designer and 3D illustrator Hashmukh Kerai, animator, illustrator, and director Laurie Rowan, and graphic designer and illustrator Tina Touli. And before we kick off with our questions, maybe if each of our speakers could give us just a few seconds to talk about the kind of work that they're producing and their experience. And Hash, how about you start?
Yeah, so I've been doing motion graphics and 3D illustration for about 6-7 years, and have a range of work from sort of sports related, corporate, kind of a range of stuff that I've done throughout all the years. And then a lot of the 3D illustration that I do on the side is relates to like really colorful toy-like work that reminds me of stuff that I grew up with. And I like to just play and have this sort of balance between client work and fun work that I do on the side.
Fantastic, thank you. And Tina, tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone. So I'm Tina Touli and I'm a graphic communication designer, maker, speaker, and educator. So I work in quite a variety of different fields like print and digital design, and produce different kind of applications such as like typographic composition or just branding, animation, even like sometimes 3D. But yeah, my work is mostly known for blending physical and digital. So kind of use inspiration materials from the physical world, merge them with the digital one in order to come up with unique solutions.
Fantastic. And Laurie, please introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Laurie. I've been an animator for about 13 years, I'd say. Very similar trajectory as has already been stated. So I started a lot of commercial work, sort of doing tie-ins for say kids media mainly. And then about 4 years ago, I sort of branched out to my own weird and wonky character work, and that's the main thing I do now.
I love that idea of your professional role to produce weird and wonky stuff. I think that's fantastic.
You slot
that's kind of what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I have a bunch of questions to put to the panel, and I'd like to draw everybody's attention to the Q&A pod that's available during this session. Now, if you are using a desktop version of the Zoom application, you can wiggle your mouse around and you'll see a Q&A button. And if you click on that, you'll see that there's an option for people to type in questions. So if you have any questions, please type them in there and I'll find an opportunity to put them to our panel. And you'll notice that we also have a chat, and you can chat with each other and share ideas as we go. So the theme of this entire campaign is about breakthroughs. And I wanted to start out with that as a topic at the beginning of our conversation today. And I'm interested to hear from all three of you, actually, how you got your first start, not just creating work because you wanted to and you moved by it and you thought it was worthwhile, but really taking this seriously as an occupation, paying the rent with it, earning money and supporting yourself by being a creative. So let's start with you, Hash. What was that turning point for you?
For me, it was probably one of my first gigs. So I was doing a few things here and there while I was at uni, and I was studying to become a motion designer. But I think the first few gigs I took on as freelance, and I didn't know what freelance was back then. So finding out about going in and getting paid to do sort of the work that I wanted to do was a breakthrough in understanding, okay, this is an industry, this is where I can work. And I think it was a project for an energy company or something like that. But it was just a really fun project to be able to work with a bunch of people and work with professionals. Is something I'd never done before. And I think that really was the first step in understanding, okay, there's this world where I can really not only create and work with other people, but I can learn so much on the job. And that was like my big moment of like realizing, yeah, this is what I want to do for sure for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. So that's interesting. When you had that first paying gig, at that point, you weren't sure. You were just trying it out and seeing, and you discovered in the course of doing the job that it was something that you felt could be a real path for you. How about you, Laurie? What was the turning point for you?
I think it was just cold hard cash. Just as soon as I made money from doing it, that legitimized it as, this is my job now. I went into it, I think, with absolutely no confidence. I've been to these creative events. Remember 1.0 used to run these kind of meetups with motion graphic artists and stuff. And I just felt like a complete imposter, and like, animators were superstars. But then seeing them in real life, they looked fallible. And I thought, yeah, I could do that, maybe, because I'm a person too. So I quit the call center I was working in at the time after uni, and just kind of read through a lot of job applications and just wrote down what they were looking for and just tried to sort of diligently learn everything as a checklist, and then started applying for jobs. And as soon as I got one, I thought, well, I'm here now, so you have to forcibly remove me.
I had the same job after uni, and I feel your pain. I love that
Horrendous.
Everyone should have that experience, I think. But I love that you approached the learning process itself in a workmanlike way. You broke it down into a checklist, and you saw that the education part was going to be critical and was the work, and you began that way and worked your way through it. How about you, Tina? What was the big break for you? What was your breakthrough?
Yeah, so for me, I was always quite keen in like creative fields. I started like as a musician, and I was like also playing like in acting or like different kind of art-related fields, but I had no idea that I wanted to become a graphic designer. So it was quite random when I had to pick the university. So it was all kind of a random situation. I didn't know even what was it when I first came in the university. And then it happened to have like a boyfriend that he was a graphic designer. And that was the moment for me that I realized what graphic design is, what are the possibilities, because I was just sitting next to him the whole day, checking like how is he doing all the stuff and how is like communicating with the clients, what are the deliverables, and all like the process of creating. So it was like kind of learning by practicing at the same time. And that was the moment that I started like really like falling in love with graphic design and like understanding how I can use it as a medium to communicate and to deliver anything that the clients might ask for.
That's fantastic. So I see like there's a theme here for everyone that in one way or another, you just kind of did it, right? It's not like you waited for some perfect situation. You just did it and worked into it and got going. So, and it didn't have to be perfect every time, which is fantastic. Actually, Tina, that leads on to another question. You were talking about sitting there and trying things out. We're in a really, it is, I would say, one can correctly use the word unique. We are in a unique situation globally. We're in the midst of coming up to the second wave of a global pandemic, the consequence of which is that right now, many people are working at home or they're at least socially distanced, and there's a greater sense of separation, which for many people working in post-production, which is the theme of our panel today, isn't that new. We're used to working alone in these situations. But how have you found, Tina, during these lockdowns that we've had, how much impact has that had for you on your creative process?
So yeah, of course it does have an impact. Like I show kind of like a shift on the client work, so the type of work that I was producing, but it's also kind of, yeah, of course, like your everyday life changes, but it's another kind of challenge to see like, okay, what should I do next? How could I perhaps, like if I have some free time, how could I use it to either like invest in myself so I can learn new skills and be ready for something afterwards, or how I could perhaps create something by myself. So perhaps you're good in tutorials, create some tutorials for people, or like create a job for yourself. So there's always opportunities, just perhaps like a period of time that we need to sit down and rethink about things that we considered as kind of standard before and see how we could find a different kind of path to make things work.
Interesting. So I suppose it's an opportunity for reflection on your overall process. How about you, Laurie? You're all of this, the presentations that everyone gave were incredibly helpful, really dense information on the website. And we gave a lot of tips and tricks, right? Approaches to creativity. Do you find that you, in the process of being at home in this way, have you learned anything new about staying creative? Has it taught you anything about yourself or about your work?
Yeah, I think, I mean, as you were saying before, my experience day to day probably hasn't changed a great deal because I am a homebody and, you know, I'm here most of the time. I think knowing that I can't leave really or do anything pleasurable outside of like these walls, not this literal grey background, but, you know, my home, has been something to contend with. So I've had to really find ways to stay afloat creatively, and that's been simple things like walking around my local environment and trying to kind of find a different interpretation of that, find more interesting things than I would have done before, sort of take pleasure in the architecture and just sort of the bit of nature that we have around here and just the fact that it can do that. Or just kind of be diligent about being in the practice of sort of doing iterative drawing and just writing and that sort of thing. It's always been about regularity for me. And I think there was a period where I kind of felt a little bit at sea and I started to let that slip and sort of got lost in this whole horrible thing that's going on. But then quickly, I think it's just my routine was the thing that kept me back on track. Just remembering to practice creativity.
So it's become a kind of change of focus, but you've still found inspiration in the environment around you.
It's an acceptance of my limitations and trying to not let that impact my mental framework too much.
That's fantastic. So on the subject of the types of activity, Hash, I can't remember if it was some conversation we had originally about because I think pretty much everybody said in one way or another, you might as well say yes to everything. You should have as many experiences as you can, get involved in as many things as you can. How are you finding it at the moment with saying yes to stuff? Are you finding that it's just not practical, or are you finding that your interest is shifting, the types of work that you're interested to do?
Yeah, I think early on in lockdown, I found myself saying yes to a lot of things just because there was a lot of, we didn't know what was going on. But I weirdly said no a lot more recently based on the fact that I've had so much time and it's given me time to reflect about the time that I spend doing the work. I felt very guilty that being in lockdown, I haven't been doing more, but I've had the opposite. It's had the opposite sort of effect on me, thinking about like, how do I step away from my work and find time to do other things that can keep my mental health like at peace. So yeah, I've been trying to find a bit more of a balance between the work that I do and then also, yeah, just doing something that's not work related, considering you're all stuck at home all the time. So yeah, it's a bit of a balance right now.
Excellent. So while we've been speaking, we've had some great questions come up in the from our participants, our attendees. Thank you, everybody. I'll just run through these and let's see what everyone thinks. So the first question we've got, these are all coming up as anonymous attendees, which is mysterious. So one of the first questions is, and this is open to whoever wants to answer it, does anyone have advice for getting client work as a beginning artist? And they were saying they love everyone's work, by the way. So does anyone have any tips they want to throw out there for getting their first clients, the people that will pay them at first? How do you approach that? Who wants to chime in? Tina, go for it.
Yeah, so what I usually suggest also to my students when I'm teaching is, usually when you get started, most likely your clients are going to be your friends or your family, something like that. It's most likely going to be also not paid, which is not ideal, but that's how you usually get started. But you can always negotiate perhaps like exchange of services instead of just getting paid. And then you will see soon, like if you produce nice work for them, they will recommend you to more and more people. So suddenly you are going to get more like invitations for projects, and they will start slowly like getting paid and then getting better paid and so on. So it's kind of a chain of opening up like the people that you know and producing good work, so people will recommend you one to another.
Great. So it's interesting that you noted there are a lot of people that I've heard give that advice would say, just start doing projects for free in general. And that if it's the right project, that can be really good advice. But it's interesting you were saying, particularly about producing work for friends and family, because it's a different kind of relationship, isn't it? It's not a client that you have to answer to quite so much. And maybe it's possible for them to be more honest with you and be more critical in ways that are constructive. It's interesting. So we have another question here. Somebody said, it'd be interesting, and this was for you, Hash, about I'd be really interested to see how Hashmukh balances creativity and work, and it's something that they struggle with. And I think you kind of answered that already, but I'm curious to know what you concluded. Was there some balance that you worked out? You know, when you're dizzy with tiredness, it's time to stop work, or is there a better measure than that?
Yeah, I think definitely stepping away just to do like other stuff. So going for a run or like exercising first of all, to step away from our office space or sometimes our bedroom, because we are working from home. So getting out of that environment is important, even though we can't necessarily go and see friends or whatever. But then in terms of balance, in terms of like just creativity and like client work and side projects, I've just planned a lot more side projects for long term, rather than I'm going to do this tomorrow, I'm going to do this next week. I'm just writing stuff out a lot more. I'm just like doodling a lot more. I'm not trying to set tasks, for tomorrow or whatever. But yeah, just like pulling stuff out onto paper and like getting myself a bit more organized in that sense has been really good to find that balance. So it's just not all stuck in my head.
Excellent. Interesting. And that kind of leads on to another question that we have here from someone attending about the amount of time. And Laurie, you might be a good person to answer this. So the question is, how much time do you spend working on personal projects versus client work? And does that balance between your personal work and your client work vary?
Yeah, it does. I think, one practical aspect of that is kind of whether I'm in feast or famine mode. Like, it seems like a lot of the time things just coincide. So I'm either incredibly busy or I'm kind of thinking I'm never going to work again. And that seems to sort of just happen over and over again. So I fill my time. I think the thing that's been the most valuable, and I think this speaks to the thing of like how to start as well, is to do my R&D in public. So that's what I use my Instagram for. So I think, you know, aside from the practical thing of needing to eat, they have equal importance to me when I'm doing client work or just progressing what I do in general, because they're ultimately the same thing. I saw someone put a quote online the other day saying, this year's personal projects are what clients will request from you next year. And I don't know if it's quite that neatly encapsulated, but I think there's something in that.
Do you agree with that, Tina? It seems like you're nodding.
Yeah, I think so. Like, it's probably like creative work that you want to get hired for. So personal projects are great, and then clients are going to see them, and then they will be like, oh, I saw this project and I want something similar for that campaign or that application. So yes, definitely happens.
Oh, that's awesome. So just staying creative. And so there seems to me that you know, we all talk about this difference between your personal creative work and your client creative work. Would anybody like to sum up? So I mean, it's all creativity, right? So what are the main differences between working on your personal projects and the stuff that you're doing for a client? How would you describe the key differences in that kind of creative work?
My personal work, I am the client. So I mean, that's this kind of thing. I've nothing to satisfy other than my own personal aggression, and I'm not kind of having to dilute or kind of consider any other aspect to it. I think that's deadlines. I think for me, that's probably like the only thing.
So I suppose there's that danger with your personal projects that it's so easy to put them off, right? It's so easy to think, oh, I'll just get that other piece of work finished first and come back to your personal projects. How do you all find time? How do you find that focus to prioritize on the creative projects that matter a lot to you, but don't necessarily have a client driving them?
For me, it's more like I kind of work on my schedule. So till like, let's say 6 or 7, I'm going to be working on clients' work. And then the evening is always going to be this kind of extra that I want to do. And yeah, I didn't have time during the day. So the busy days, that's how I usually kind of try to stick with this kind of schedule of working 9 to 6 on clients' work and then do anything else that I actually wanted to do. So yeah, else you never make time.
So you do a full day's work and then a full day's work. That's your...
Yeah, kind of. If you consider it as a solution, yes. Or weekends, perhaps.
So I have some, I've got a couple more questions here. Actually, we've got a couple of questions came up for Laurie as well about your creative work, which I'll come back around to. We also had a question about what is Z? Z is a range of computer hardware developed by HP that's particularly well suited to creative work. So that just check it out. Z by HP is a whole fantastic range of technologies. I want to ask a little bit about a kind of more general question about working professionally, because we're looking at breakthroughs and having those opportunities. One of the things that came up earlier is this issue of receiving criticism. You know, we were saying, Tina, about when it's I was saying when it's your friends and family, sometimes they can be more blunt with you than a client or a colleague can be. Hash, how do you, as a professional, how do you respond when someone is critical of work that you've produced? How do you deal with what can sometimes feel like a very personal criticism?
Yeah, I'm very open with it. And I think that's why, thankfully, a lot of my clients like working with me. As long as it's something that I can improve on, I think that's the most important thing. If someone just straight up says they don't like it without any feedback or anything that's constructive, then yeah, it's worthless. I can't do anything with it. But otherwise, yeah, to this day, as a freelancer, I know that whoever I'm working with, whoever the team is, the agency, they're delivering it to the client, and it's not me. I'm just there to kind of help out. So yeah, I just take it with a pinch of salt and see if it's something I can learn from. And yeah, I try not to attach myself too closely to, especially client projects. So I'm okay with making that final amend that I don't necessarily agree with. But if it's for the greater good of the project and the client really wants it, then that's fine. So yeah, I try and like not be too attached to that and then criticism.
That's interesting. So it's kind of taking ego out of it
Yeah.
and being part of the team where you just have to get a thing done. Laurie, Tina, would you agree with that for your experience?
No, I tend to smash everything up and just kind of. Yeah, no, you're not your work, so nothing's ever personal.
Yeah.
Like everyone just wants the best thing for what the project is. So it's to be listened to, it's to be considered, and if you don't agree with it, you know, you might not be right. So just question it. Just be completely open and fluid as to whether it's. You know, right
Yeah,
thing.
for me, like whenever I don't really agree with the feedback, I'm always kind of trying to see, like, try to apply this feedback to see how it looks like, and then have an opinion, a strict opinion, and say, hey, it doesn't work. Like, I tried it. Here you can see. Else, perhaps you might be wrong, as Laurie said. So you have to reconsider if that critique is actually right or wrong.
That's brilliant advice, actually, I think. Because when you first get feedback, it can seem like, no, they can't possibly be right. What footage have I not yet smashed? But then if you just try it, it can seem like you see it. And even if you don't agree still, you might see another way.
Most devastating thing for me is when a client does drastically improve my work. And it has happened quite a few times. They suggest something like that. Oh, God.
Oh, no,
I would
it
never
is
reach
better.
out my own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it happens quite often what Laurie said, because sometimes like you're working on one piece for quite a long time, so you're kind of blind to see that clearly. So like if somebody sees that for first time, for sure it's going to have a feedback that is different, that might be helpful and might make your work way better than it was. So yeah, it happens.
That's brilliant. Yeah, well, and I suppose it's an iterative process, right? And it's ultimately it's if you get it finished. We had a question here. Actually, let's combine these questions. These are for Laurie from our attendees. So the first question is, I really like your work. How did you come up with this look? And there's another question also for Laurie about the software that you use. And the question is, what do you use and how did you learn it, specifically in motion? This person saying, I would love to make similar types of work, but feel like there aren't many resources on how to make that style online. So what would you say about that?
Can you break it down a bit? What's the first bit?
So the first question is just about how you came up with the look for the work that you're producing.
Just a long, laborious process of kind of like, you wouldn't have seen a lot of the stuff that didn't land before I eventually put something up online. So it was just a lot of drawing, really, and then it was just taking influence from a few different areas and just kind of indulging the things I was interested in that had no immediate relation to what I was putting out. So I think I've used some strange examples before in the talk to do of kind of folk costume or you know, ceramics and those kind of things. I sort of identify what the quality of those things I like are, the broad qualities, but it's not sort of identifiably the characteristics of specifically another artist's work. And then sort of just start to experiment with those things, play around, and then just draw to the point that you're past sick of it and just sort of see what your subconscious is saying. I think that's the basis of it, and then it's kind of, you know, it feeds itself, and then I start to recognize what the elements of the style are that work for me. I think the big sort of leap for me was not attempting to make something good while I was doing it. I think that was a sort of a block, and that's where I got writer's block a lot of the time. It was just to do and not consider whether, you know, what the qualitative value of this thing is.
That's fantastic. And I love that idea. You know, there's that quote that I'm going to misquote from Leonardo da Vinci, that true art is never completed, only abandoned. And just not being attached to a particular piece of work and it being part of the process. I'd like to open up actually I'd love to hear from everybody. The next question was for Laurie, but I'd really like to hear from all three of you about, so what are the main software applications that you use mostly? So Hash, do you want to go first? What are the main applications you tend to use day to day?
So it's two mainly, which is After Effects for doing any like 2D motion graphics, and infographics or video work. and then Cinema 4D for any 3D work that I do.
Great. And Tina?
Yeah, for me, it's the range of the Creative Cloud. So Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, After Effects are like the main ones. And then as well Cinema 4D for like 3D stuff.
Excellent. And Laurie?
Yeah, the Adobe Suite as well, but I use 3ds Max as opposed to Cinema 4D, and that's because that's the one I learned. But you know, I'm thinking of kind of branching out as well.
Excellent. And we have a question here for Tina. And the question is, where do you get your inspiration from? Your work is really varied and cool. So what inspires you when you're starting new projects?
Yeah, so thank you very much, firstly. And yeah, so my inspiration is quite often from the physical world, and it can be like really simple things, such as like I created the campaign for What About Water, which was for the World Water Day, and it was just water and oil, which are two materials that they are not mixing, so they bring the water can be visible. Or like a little ribbon was the whole kind of inspiration for creating illustration for the 36 days of type. So it can be like super simple things that they are everyday objects that they're around you. Or one of like a good starting point that was one of the workshops that I was teaching lately was just grabbing a glass. So that's not the best glass. And try and put like perhaps some typography or something behind and photograph it from different angles. And you will see how you can actually, from a simple object like that, get so much inspiration and so many different graphics. So yeah, it's usually just the physical world and all the things that are around us. As Laurie also mentioned, a bit of like the surrounding that we have, like when you're going for a walk, all the inspiration that comes, or yeah, everything that's around you.
That's fantastic. So,
sorry, I just
what's
got
that?
carried away. Because I love the idea of photographing through glass and watching it walk. I'm gonna do that as soon as we
Yeah,
can.
you can try it as well. It has lovely outcomes. It was just a workshop that I did like a few weeks ago, and I was also impressed by such a simple object, like how many different angles you can get from that. So yeah, a lovely little exercise.
It's interesting. Everyone seems to be describing a kind of a change of perspective being the thing here, whether it's because of the lockdown or just how you approach new work. And there's something about the creative thinking as a type of thinking that seems to be so bound up in perspectives. But how do you, there's a couple of questions here. There's a question here from Reese Williams. Welcome, Reese. How do you find time to learn new software or try out new releases of software, such as new 3D renderers? And that connects with a question I wanted to ask you guys as well about balancing education and learning with your creative practice. How do you find the time? How do you balance? How much of your work is learning? Hash, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah. So I give myself an hour a day every morning as like tutorial time and like R&D. But specifically we're learning tutorials, and that could be like a paid for tutorial that I purchased online, or like YouTube videos, or it could be a book on lighting that I need for the 3D stuff that I do. And that gives me, like then I know in the week I've spent 5 hours learning something new. And then I note everything down. This is the topic. This is the new piece of software. This is the new render engine that I was playing around with. And yeah, that constant learning always feeds back into my work. And there's never a time then I can say, oh, I don't know what to do next, because there's a technique that I learned that one morning that I can, transfer over to on that weekend free that I have. So giving myself a time, sort of timetable of, and telling myself, 1 hour a day guaranteed, helps me.
Wow, I'm so envious, and I wish that I had that much discipline. How about you guys, Tina? How much time do you spend on learning?
I love this technique of 1 hour per day. Perhaps I should try it too. That's lovely advice, actually. Yeah, for me it's more like it comes kind of natural. I'm not really planning it. So it's more like I'm gonna check like on Instagram or the social media that I'm following, and I'm gonna see like a quick tutorial or something, and I'm gonna be like, oh, I need to watch that, so I'm gonna watch it at that moment. or whenever I do self-initiated projects, I make sure that for sure I'm going to learn a new skill or something. So that is also the point for me to do a self-initiated project, to experiment and try something new. But yeah, it's mostly like, yeah, I would say just randomly kind of grabbing stuff around me that I like and either bookmark them to check them later or at the same time.
Great. Wow. Yeah, I end up with long lists of things I intend to look at.
Oh, me too. It happens quite often.
How about you, Laurie? What works for you with the education thing?
I tend to, because I make a lot of like little character loops and stuff, so I always incorporate things I don't know how to do into them. Like not sort of willfully, but or sort of intentionally, but I just won't let that be a block. I won't design it around what I have what's my pre-existing knowledge base. And then so when it comes to actually executing it, I will have to search out that method, and then after that I know it. But also what I tend to do is I don't have nearly as much discipline to like sort of do an hour in the morning. I'll try. Yeah, I just kind of, if I'm doing something that doesn't require my full attention and I can have something playing in the background, I tend to just have tutorials playing in the background, like YouTube tutorials. And I'll just find that there's a kind of certain way of selecting polygons that I haven't known for 3 years, and I've wasted probably a week of my life.
That's fantastic. These are great tips, guys. So I love that idea of playing tutorials in the background. I had a French teacher that said I should put French radio on in the background. You're just kind of picking up the sound of it. That's really valuable. Now, we had a question come up here that again, I think I'd really like to hear from everybody about pricing your work. When you're first starting out, how can you approach coming up with a number, negotiating a number to actually get paid? And I'd love to hear all of your experiences about this. Let's start with you, Laurie, since you were last up anyway.
It's tough, isn't it? I don't, I think I look up sort of like forums and see what the general value of things are. And then I just kind of send an email with the value in and just hope it gets accepted. And, you know, like generally it does. I think that you can find the sort of set industry value for like sort of what you do. And it's something you build up over time, I think. I just don't, well, my advice on this is going to be sort of vague because it's something that I'm continually kind of at odds with myself. But yeah, I sort of decided a value that I think my work's worth, and then my clients tend to agree. And if they don't, we'll talk about it.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because it can be a little bit like a poker game where you're sort of thinking that you have a number, but you have to come up with something. And that's good advice, I think, to do some research into what it seems like people are charging for this work.
I'll just say quickly as well that I'm not embarrassed about it. I think that's one thing. I don't think it's like I'm being caught. I think there's a fear that kind of like, God, if I say something outrageous here, they're going to never speak to me again. And the worst they can do is just say, oh, that's not what we had in mind for the budget. And then there's a conversation to be had. So there's not kind of, when I first started, I remember kind of like just not wanting to send that email, maybe like waiting half an hour because I thought even the fact that I was asking for money to do this thing that I love was outrageous. But yeah, just it's not something to be coy about, I don't think.
That's just before we go on, that's a really interesting thing to highlight as well, that, you know, people talk about imposter syndrome, that how can people take me seriously doing this work? But there's also that embarrassment that you're doing it, that somehow, how is it that am I allowed to get paid? Even if I'm great at this, am I allowed to get paid because I also really enjoy it? And I remember reading a quote that they call it work because they have to pay you to do it. And I think it's an unhelpful attitude. What about you, Tina? How do you come up with those numbers?
So I guess like the more experience you have, it's easier for you like to say the number because you did similar projects and so on. But at the beginning, what I usually suggest is try and think like, okay, how much do you want to earn per annum? You want, or you have to, it doesn't matter, like pick a number and then divide it to months and then to weeks and then to hours. And then you will get a rate per hour that you need. So perhaps if somebody comes in with a project, you can calculate and say, okay, I need around perhaps 5 days of work. So I'm gonna take the hours price and make it a daily price, and then 5 days. And then I'm gonna adjust a bit up or down the price correspondingly, like depending on the client and yeah, depending on how you feel about the project, if it's something worth a bit extra from that or a bit less and so on. So yeah, kind of mathematically calculated in the beginning, and then the more experience you have, it's going to be easier for you to just calculate the price straight away.
An interesting balance. You have a kind of breakdown, but then there's a sort of feeling part as well, where you're looking at the individual project and the value to the client, the impact for them, and also the responsibility. But there is separately from the work itself, you have a baseline of income that you need, or this just isn't going to work. So you have to serve that as well. How about you, Hash? How did you start out with the numbers?
Similar to Laurie, I would Google stuff, and thankfully there's enough information, and there's like surveys that a lot of designers do nowadays where they input how much they make for if they're motion designer or illustrator. But then again, I'd also say like phone a friend. Honestly, if you have a friend or peer or someone that you've worked with, ask them. And I do that to this day still. I still thankfully have a few people that I work with who are pretty open about how much they earn. And then asking them and finding out, oh, okay, you got paid this much for this project because it had these variables, or also this brand. So yeah, I think if you can ask someone, that's great. If not, there's enough information out on the internet if you do a bit of digging to be able to find out.
Excellent.
I'll make just a quick addition to that, actually, because what my thing as well is that I don't ever work on project rate. I only work on day rate, and that's the thing I have for freelance, because I've had bad experiences where there's just been sort of creep, and then I just watch my day rate diminish as the project reaches on. So I'm kind of always solid on, except for directing work, that works slightly differently. But yeah, I sort of have an established day rate, and that's the thing I charge as opposed to.
It's a fantastic way of managing client expectations as well, because you can just say, absolutely, just so you know, that's going to add a day to my invoice. And suddenly they become so much more focused. Okay, we're pretty much out of time, but there was one last question that came up in the Q&A pod, and thank you for that, sharing that, everyone. This one, I don't know just see if anybody, if this is meaningful to anyone. So the question is, how do you folks render stuff working remote? Do you have expensive infrastructure server rooms in your homes? Are you working with proxies all the time, or just how? I know workflows are getting better, but I'm from machine room in Soho era. So is anyone working remotely? And are you finding that you need to use any particular special technological solutions or planning solutions to make that possible?
I can go with that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I render a lot of 3D stuff. So I've used render farms before, which are pretty cool to send your work out to, and they're pretty cheap nowadays because there's so many of them. But honestly, I just leave stuff rendering overnight. My like bills for electric are pretty expensive because of it, but it's what I have to do. And then if not, if I could afford to buy like a better machine, whatever. But yeah, make use of what you have, especially if you're starting out. A lot of people always try and like go heavy with the equipment that they buy, thinking that will drive their creativity. But it really won't. That's just an aid to make things go faster. So yeah, I just like leave things overnight if need be.
That's excellent. Thank you. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time for today. So Laurie, Hash, Tina, thanks very much for all of the insights that you've shared today. For everyone tuned in, you still have until September the 30th to get your competition entries in. And I think we have our moderator, Jules, here, might be able to put up on screen the link to that competition, where you'll find information all about it, some amazing prizes, and a chance to have your work reviewed by our brilliant panelists here. And yes, you can see it right there. So this is the Power Your Breakthrough competition. Tons of amazing prizes. Jules has helpfully posted the link in the chat as well, so that you can go and check it out. And again, thank you, Hash, Tina, and Laurie. That was really fantastic and insightful. And everyone have a great week ahead.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yay. It's weird. This is normally where the applause happens. We need a button to press. We can have the applause. But we'll wind up there. Thank you.